Young Justice went out of its way to reinvent a lot of the characters that they put their hands on, whether it was Artemis, Wally, even Robin to some extent, but especially in characters like Miss Martian and Superboy. But no character was altered further than Aqualad himself. And it all comes down to a fundamental change in the character of Aqualad, that being the decision to make what was supposed to be a brand new character, Calderon, for the TV show, except for the fact that Jeff Johns got winds of it and debuted him a few months prior in an official DC book. But to keep it real with y'all, Calder was originally supposed to debut for the show Young Justice, and so this show completely remodeled the origin of Aqualad to encompass the fact that not only does Garth exist, but also Calderon. It's just that Garth simply chose not to be Aqualad, instead staying behind in Atlantis, and this Earth we see Calderon choose to be Aqualad, and I will go forward just calling him Aqualad. And it's, funnily enough, this interpretation of the character that was actually my first real introduction to Aqualad, because I don't know if Teen Titans, like the 2003 show, really counts, because he's not really characterized in like the one episode I remember seeing as a kid, comparatively to this Aqualad, who set the framework in my mind for what it means to be a leader. And that's a lot of what Aqualad does throughout this first season of Young Justice, demonstrating a style of leadership that is seldom shown in fiction specifically, whether it was from his vulnerability to the way in which he handles himself, not only emotionally, being a far more emotionally sound character than a majority of the cast, especially for his age of 16, but also with the level of empathy that he shows throughout the show for not only his fellow team members, but even the villains that he ends up facing throughout the show. And I think that's part of the reason that I ended up falling in love with this specific variant of the character so much, and it's kind of a shame that he really only exists in this show as he is present. But without further ado, preamble over, let's talk about Calder in Young Justice. When we first see Calder in the two-part special that will be known as Independence Day, he is the only member of the team, despite him and Wally being the same age of 16. I cut Grayson slack because he's like 13 years old. He's the only member of the team that seems to be taking his matchup against an ice-based foe even remotely serious. Calder himself doesn't really care much for talking about his special day that's upcoming until after the threat is dealt with. Then he finally expresses his excitement. Calder is always business first, and he takes the mission very seriously, unlike his two counterparts, which were making quips and jokes and not really taking it all too seriously. But we also see that Calder isn't just an uptight stick in the mud, like, say, Scott from X-Men Evolution. He shows a lot of excitement for the fact that finally he is going to be welcomed into at least what he believes to be the Justice League's secret playhouse. Yeah, that doesn't exactly go as planned, because the Justice League had zero intention of showing any of these guys the actual playhouse, which is the Watchtower, and instead were simply just bringing them there as a show of faith, continuing to treat them as sidekicks, taking them to a place that's really for tourists and nothing more. And that realization hits Calder pretty hard, specifically because he feels as though he is almost equal to Aquaman, especially when they're out fighting, considering he is Aqualad, and he's also the oldest and most mature on the team, at least that's the way he views it. And so for him, it almost feels like they're treating him as though he is not mature enough to handle this responsibility.
My mentor, my king, I thought he trusted me.
It's this idea of betrayed trust, and also the idea that these guys are too young to handle any sort of big responsibilities, that actually spurs the team to form. This is the making of the Young Justice Squad, because once they hear that there is a fire at Cadmus, the three of them decide to go investigate on their own, rather than involving the Justice League. Calder reluctantly agrees, and ultimately decides this is their way of proving themselves. But they end up biting off way more than they can chew, because as it turns out, there's not just any ordinary fire that's going on. This was all orchestrated by the xenomorphs that live underneath Cadmus in order to not only expose them, but to expose Superboy. Yes, I'm telling you that that's not how the characters come across it, but it's not really important for Calder's video. And it's in Cadmus that they end up finding a Superman clone hidden underground known as the Superboy. Or, you know, the backup plan in case Superman goes crazy. And it is, of course, Calder's first idea to call the League, because he's the most pragmatic of the group. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in the slightest, and instead they all get beat up by Superboy and kidnapped. That's great first mission, team. It's also where they find out the fact that this Superboy has never known a life outside of the lab that he has been birthed in. It's also revealed that he was nowhere near in control of every one of the actions that he made when he attacked the group. Calder is not only the first to realize this, but the first to actually try and reason with Superboy instead of just insulting him like Kid Flash does. Gotta love KF, man. Calder has this level of emotional intelligence that is honestly rarely seen, especially for a character in what is ultimately a kid's show. I think that's part of what makes his character so special, was the fact that he was emotionally intelligent enough to somewhat subtly manipulate Connor into wanting a life for himself outside of Cadmus. It's actually Calderon's words that spur Superboy into breaking the team out.
You live. That gives you the right to follow your own path. A weapon or a person.
Calder ends up spurring Superboy not only into freeing the team, but also into joining them to see a life outside of Cadmus and outside of everything he was mind taught, I guess, via some of the xenomorphs that are under Cadmus control at this point. And ultimately, it is Aqualad who ends up standing up for the team, firstly in front of the Justice League, and declaring themselves a sovereign team, essentially telling them to get in line or get out of the way.
I am sorry, but we will.
Aqualad, stand down.
Apologies, my king. But no. We did good work here tonight. The work you trained us to do. Together, on our own, we forged something powerful, important.
And it was from this moment forward that we are officially going to recognize these guys as the team. They never call themselves the Young Justice team, they just always call themselves the team for covert ops. Covert with like very heavy quotations. This team is so far from covert, it's hilarious. On a more serious note, this would be the beginning of the team, fundamentally, but there's one thing they're lacking, and that's shown in the very next episode, that being leadership. The team in and of itself is all just kind of running together based off the fact that 3 of them were friends. They picked up Connor along the way, and McGann has just joined. They don't actually have any sort of structure or semblance to leadership, but we can start to see qualities as to why they will eventually elect Calder to be the leader of the team. Mostly that being his ability to stay cool, calm, and collected under distressing situations. For example, when McGann is first getting introduced to the team, she uses her abilities to mind read, which is obviously not something we're cool with here on Earth, because it's not a normal thing. Calder's the only person who doesn't overreact and instead simply tries to explain to McGann why it's uncool and why Superboy might have lost his mind.
Things are different on Earth. Here, your powers are an extreme invasion of privacy.
But he was also there for Superboy to help guide him in understanding how to apologize to McGann, because he was able to recognize Superboy felt bad for his reaction.
I may not have psychic powers, but I can guess what you're thinking. You overreacted and you don't know how to apologize. Just say sorry.
As for the rest of the episode, their first true mission together does not go well in the slightest, because there is no sense of leadership, there is no sense of ideas. It doesn't help that McGann is completely fresh and trying her best, but isn't exactly known for being of superhero prowess. Neither is Connor necessarily, but I guess having like 16 years worth of mental training helps him out far more than McGann's 40-something years. Regardless, it's very clear that this team is suffering from a lack of leadership throughout not only this episode, but the following episode. On the team's first officially assigned mission, they were simply supposed to go to Santa Prisca. It was supposed to be recon and nothing more. So Calder drops out, he's going to swim to the island and try and disable all of the anti-air tech they have going on so the team can land. But when the team does, we are shown immediately why they're not known for covert ops. Just Connor casually causing a seismic event. Robin absolutely disappears and goes off in the middle of nowhere after anointing himself leader because he has the most experience despite only being 13. It also doesn't help that Wally, in making first contact, ends up exposing the team if Superboy didn't do it enough with his seismic event. The team is in complete mess and disarray because Robin has no clue in how to manage the team. His role with Batman was so defined that essentially he knew what to do, and so did Batman, but the team doesn't. Wally also throws his hat in the leadership ring, but he was never a serious candidate, let's be honest. And ultimately, at the end of the episode, the team collectively comes to the decision that Calder is their best option for leader, because he is the most level-headed. He is the one who is able to talk and communicate with the team at its best. He's also the person that understands each member of the team the best. Throughout the last few episodes, not only has he been understanding and compassionate to McGann, but to Connor as well, along with his two very, very close friends. And so ultimately, they vote for Calder to be the leader, but he also makes it very clear that this team is eventually one day going to rest on the shoulders of Dick Grayson, because he was born for this. He was made for this. This is everything he has been working towards. But for right now, Calder has to shoulder the load of being the leader, even if he doesn't necessarily want to be. Even if he's not the best suited to be the leader in the long term, he is the best right now.
Then I accept the burden until you are ready to lift it from my shoulders. You were born to lead this team. Maybe not now, but soon.
I think putting Calder in this leadership position and the way in which they chose to write Calder as a character did a lot for me personally growing up, and probably a lot for people who looked like me. You gotta remember, this was 2010, so the idea of a black teen male specifically having a leading role in a TV show in which they are presented as being the leader, they're presented as being calm, they're presented as being collected, they are presented as having emotions such as empathy, sympathy, the ability for Calder to be emotionally sound and not just be an angry black teenager was something that was so huge for me as a kid. And I can only imagine was also big for people that were my peers, that wanted to see themselves on screen in a positive role, in a positive light. I wasn't really an angry kid. I spent a lot of my time trying to be empathetic, trying to be sympathetic, trying to understand the people around me, and that's something Calder does to great effect. I saw a lot of myself in this character, and for me, it's something I aspired to be. The style of leadership Calder had always spoke to me on a personal level, because he cared about the people around him. He always cared about doing the right thing, even if it wasn't going to be the easiest. He cared about understanding his friends. That's something that was put on display in this show, and I don't think it gets enough credit for doing this, especially in the early 2010s. It's part of the reason I love this show specifically so much. And building off of what I've said previously, Calder spends the rest of his time as leader throughout these early episodes being the team's rock. When we're introduced to Artemis and Wally's absolute disdain for Artemis being the new archer of the team instead of Speedy or Red Arrow as he goes by now, they are tasked with a very simple mission, actually from Red Arrow, funnily enough, which is to help protect this scientist as they're trying to destroy something called the Fog, which would essentially eat up a bunch of data and tech and destroy it. Very bad for the whole world, not cool. But throughout the entire episode, Wally and Artemis bicker like an old married couple, and it's so funny. It's so funny. But Calder is basically there playing mediator the entire time. As well, he's also trying to help this poor scientist to not only take care of the job she's supposed to in finding the Fog and disabling it, but also deal with these 13 through like 16-year-olds that are supposed to be watching her and yet argue constantly. He even plays the role of comforting the scientist when explaining to her that simply she's got to go online in order to find the fog, and assuring her that she will be protected by them.
We will protect you.
Tracking fog now.
In a following episode, in Wally's wild abandonment to try and impress McGann, he pretends to know magic, and that almost gets the team killed. Calder doesn't even jump on him, unlike Artemis does, after this incident. Instead, he diverts attention away from them. He then instead tries to explain to McGann why Wally doesn't really believe in magic and why he's always trying to control the world around him. He's sticking up for his friend while also not condoning Wally's actions because Wally was being an idiot.
Wally uses his understanding of science to control what he cannot comprehend. Acknowledging the existence of magic would be to relinquish the last vestige of that control.
It's also worth noting that this episode introduces us to Dr. Fate and the helmet of Dr. Fate, which will become important later. So just keep it in mind that this episode introduces it. And also the idea that Dr. Fate is looking for a new host for the helmet since Kent died, and that host would be permanently attuned to Dr. Fate and would never be allowed to take the helmet off, as Wally was nearly trapped inside of it. And the very next episode, I think, covers Calder's character really well. It's all about downtime. One of my top 3 favorite episodes from this season starts off with the team getting absolutely trounced by Clayface. Also one of the only few times we see Clayface in this show. And it ultimately ends with Batman having to come in and save the day. And it's all because Calder's head wasn't in the game. The rest of the team came ready to play, but he wasn't. His mind wasn't in the game, and his mind was elsewhere on somebody else.
Of late, I am not even convinced I belong on the surface world. For so many years, it filled my every thought. But now that I am here, my dreams are all Atlantis.
Atlantis? Or someone you left behind?
Calder is quite the lover boy. He is missing Atlantis because he left a girl behind, somebody he cared a lot about. That would be Tula. He loved her more than anything else. And in all reality, the dude's only been on the surface for 2 months, but in those 2 months, he has not gone back to his home, Atlantis. He has not gone back to see Tula, he has not gone back to see Garth, or even Queen Mara. He has been living his own life on the surface world and has been doing all of these things with the Young Justice group. So he hasn't been home. And that idea of missing home is something I can relate with a lot. But Calder is also faced with the harsh reality that a lot of things change, unfortunately, especially when you are gone for so long. It's not going to be the same when you come back.
You would no longer be in Tula's class, or Garth's.
Throughout a lot of my life, I moved around a lot. And so once you leave and you for me, it was states. So I would leave the state that I had made a lot of friends in and I had been close with people in. And so when I left, it sucked, and all I ever wanted to do was go back. And that's a lot of what we're seeing Calder deal with right now. It's the idea that he left, and he's only been gone for 2 months, but all he wants to do is go back because he was happy there. He had a girl that he really liked, everything was good, and all he wants to do is go back to that place. But ultimately, when I would come back to visit, or even in some cases come back to live in that same place once again, it was always different. Your friend groups change. People who you were close with, you're no longer close with. For me, it was years. So my whole friend groups would change. People I was close with would change. Girls I may have been interested in are dating other people because, I'm not even there, right? And so now you're holding on to this memory of this place that you believed to be so awesome and grand and perfect for you, and you were so frustrated and upset with leaving, only to find out when you come back, it's never gonna be the same as it was. And I think that's the lesson Calder has to learn in this episode, is that you need to be okay with moving on. And that's something Aquaman tries to instill in him in a few conversations, but ultimately his heart was dead set on Tula. It wasn't until she had told him that she is now dating Garth that he was finally able to let go.
Calder, I'm sorry. We wanted to tell you sooner, but Garth and I, we are together.
Yeah, to me, that's definitely a little bit of a funny and wild twist, is to be like, yeah, by the way, dating your best friend. But again, Calder left. He never expressed his feelings, and he left. And that's okay. And it's finally at the end of the episode that Calder comes to realize that his new life with his new friends and his new family that he's making on this team is good. He enjoys what he does, and he enjoys living the life that he does. And that's really all that matters. So he can go visit his old friends as often as he'd like, and he can take care of everything in that area. But ultimately, his heart isn't there anymore, and that's okay. And it's okay to move on and to do other things. I didn't really get this episode very much when I was younger. I kind of always found it to be boring, and I skipped it a lot of the times. If only I had known such a sentiment would hold dear in my later life, maybe I would have paid more attention this episode. But I found it to be very, very enjoyable. I also found the final sequence between Garth and Aqualad to be really, really funny.
Have you ever wondered what would have happened if I had stayed behind and you had become Aqualad?
Never.
No, neither have I.
It's also 100% worth noting that the dude handled this very, very well, especially considering that's like his best friend. Very, very demure of you, Calder. Very demure. But unfortunately for Calder, while he may have found his reason to stay on the surface and continue to be leader and found his heart here, being leader isn't exactly going to be easy. Red Arrow ends up calling Aqualad for help because of the summit between North and South Malaysia that is apparently being stung out by one of the League of Shadows assassins, Cheshire, someone who seeks to cause chaos and war continuing between the two countries. Unfortunately, this also means protecting Lex Luthor. And while Red Arrow has his own story to deal with regarding this, he ultimately asks for Calder's help, and Calder ends up obviously agreeing. Like, the two are quite close to being best friends. But it's during this episode that Calder is put out on a tip via Sportsmaster that there is a mole inside of his team specifically. Also, this episode has that really weird Cheshire scene. If you know, you know. But Calder isn't quite ready to just take Sportsmaster's word for it, and so he's not exactly ready to spill the beans to the team.
It is over.
Is it? I heard what Sportsmaster said. Do you really think there's a mole on your team feeding him intel?
I cannot rule out the possibility. I will investigate, quietly.
I think what Calder's doing is very smart. He wants to investigate quietly. He wants to make sure that he doesn't A, tip off the mole, or B, cause undue unrest amongst his teammates, which is obviously something that could be a severe problem, especially in a team so young. But the biggest issue with doing this is the fact that they built their entire team off of trust. The entire team's formation via the big three was because they felt like sidekicks who were never trusted with any sort of information, who were never given any sort of true autonomy from the people in charge. And so now to have their leader, someone they look up to, be holding secrets from them is definitely not a good look for the team. But you know, Calder's really smart, and I doubt this will bite him in the ass. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Okay, so quick pause. I just found this out while I was doing the editing for this video, but apparently the episode previously, Targets, was weirdly postponed by like 6 months. It was originally supposed to air in like June 3rd of 2011, but then it got postponed for a reason we have no idea about. And then on 13th and 14th, it was briefly released on Cartoon Network's website before it was screened at San Diego Comic-Con in July, and then came out officially in September, meaning like the show started airing in March of 2011, and then after episode 9 just took like a 6-month hiatus, which is insane. And we have no information on that at all. If anybody knows why Targets was postponed, please leave me a comment because I am now stupidly curious. Anyways, back to your regularly scheduled video. So like 2 episodes later, Superboy may or may not overhear the fact that there is a mole problem and that he is one of the suspects of being the mole on the team. So yeah, it did come back to bite Calder in the ass pretty hard. So if you could imagine, this doesn't exactly inspire trust not only in their leader, but in the team as a whole. And this is really terrible timing because they're all about to go on another mission and their entire leadership structure has been thrown into chaos. Calder, in and of himself, now no longer has control over the team, nor any Calder has built his entire leadership style off of being open, being honest, being trusting, being empathetic, being sympathetic, putting himself in the shoes of the people that he is supposed to order and make march with him to certain doom in some cases. And now he has lost any and all goodwill and trust. And so when the team lands for their next covert op, they all just kind of go off and do their own things. Wally and Kid Flash are off working together, Artemis and McGann go off together, and Connor just goes and does loner Connor things, because why not? And throughout the episode, Aqualad is trying to regain control over the team, but nobody is respecting him in the slightest, and he gets to a point where he can't just be who he normally is. He can't just be his calm, collected self because they're not listening to that version of Calder. And unfortunately, Captain Marvel is actually the one who points this out to him.
Batman takes command. He has to, for the good of the League. Thank you for helping me understand.
And so that's what Calder does. After getting the wisdom of Solomon and after Captain Marvel gets kidnapped because Billy is like a 10-year-old child, which I still find hilarious, Calder is able to rally the team by basically telling them, I'm the leader, you all elected me, we're going to finish this mission, and then afterwards, like, I'll be done. But for now, we gotta get this done.
This is not up for debate. You all chose me to lead. When the mission is over, if you wish to select a new leader, I will happily step down. But until that time, I am in command here.
And surprisingly, that actually works, oddly enough. It's just, all of this could have been so easily avoided if, again, Calder wanted to keep this partially a secret, not to tip off the mole, but if Calder had simply just been honest with his team from the get-go and explained to them the situation previously, this probably wouldn't have been an issue. And I think that it's something he needed to learn as a leader going forward, that these secrets do not behoove him or the team. A lesson that Dick Grayson clearly doesn't learn.
And given how this mission went, he nearly succeeded. But you had to consider it might be true.
Yes, as leader I did, in which case I did not wish to alert the traitor.
Hate to say it, but makes sense.
I am still prepared to step down.
All in favor of keeping Aqualad as leader?
And this is just one of the few flaws that Aqualad has as a leader, which I feel like make him an interesting leader. And his next biggest flaw is his over-infatuation with self-sacrifice. Throughout like a 3-episode span, Aqualad was more than willing to sacrifice himself for the betterment of the team, which is all good in theory, except for the idea that like now the team doesn't exactly have a leader. When the Injustice League is debuted as the big bads of the season, and in Batman's infinite wisdom, he ultimately decides the Justice League is better spent fighting plants, and he is instead going to send his covert op team of teenagers to go fight the Joker and the Injustice League, which has literally, like, we're looking at Poison Ivy, Black Adam. This team has Black Adam, and they sent the covert ops team. I don't know what the thought process was behind this from Batman, but like, my boy, it was not a great idea. On a more serious, character appropriate note, Calder knows pretty much that they're going to be outmatched, so he brings a plan B, that being the helmet of Dr. Fate, and he fully intends to wear it Considering he's actually somewhat attuned with the mystic arts, he fully intends to put it on and wear it if things get too dire. He knows this means that Naboo would have him for the rest of his life, but he ultimately does not see that as a problem in the slightest, nor does he really care, especially if it comes down to needing the helmet. And when the team proved to be outmatched completely, he ultimately decided to put on the helmet, much to Wally's dismay. And he takes on the mantle of Dr. Fate. Now, Dr. Fate completely shifts the momentum of this battle. Not only is he able to easily deal with the majority of these villains due to the fact that Dr. Fate is one of the most broken DC characters to ever exist, but ultimately, Calder was about to be trapped inside of the helmet forever, and he very well knew this, and he's the leader of the team, and yet he was more than willing to take this sacrifice. Now, whether that makes him a good or bad leader, I want to discuss after I show you another instance of Calder himself doing this whole self-sacrifice thing. Because ultimately, this has no real consequence, as Calder is easily able to take the helmet off, thanks to everybody's favorite previous owner of the helmet, Kent. Failsafe is the next episode in which Calder decides to self-sacrifice. In a world in which the Justice League are being eradicated by some unknown force that can easily and handedly dispatch them without a single issue, the Young Justice Squad is left to fend for themselves. This is nothing more than a training exercise done by Martian Manhunter in order to get the team accustomed to failure and facing overwhelming odds, and knowing what to do when there's nothing you can do, as Granddad would say. But it all ultimately becomes way too real when Artemis ends up quote-unquote dying, but McGann's mind can't comprehend the fact that this is fake and this isn't real, and so she believes it to be real, and all of a sudden, what was supposed to be a simple training exercise is now a true life or death battle. And it is in this moment that the team literally forgets that this is a training exercise. They believe that they have just lost one of their closest friends, and now they must be able to handle it. So Calder steps up as leader. He rallies the troops using his emotional intelligence. But that doesn't exactly last for too long. When they get to the Hall of Justice, they are ultimately able to find Martian Manhunter alive. He's really come in to stop the whole training exercise, but because McGann's such a powerful telepath, he completely forgot about that. So the team believes that these things are nothing more than Zeta tubes that are beaming them to a place where the heroes are being held and nobody's actually dying. And so with this very shaky information, Calder ultimately decides to make a decision that would alter the course of the team, because he ultimately decides to sacrifice himself in order for Superboy and just a few more of the soldiers on base to get to safety. It is a very noble act, something that he didn't necessarily need to do, but ultimately chose to do in order to protect the most amount of people. It's something a hero would do, but he also needs to recognize that he's not just a hero in this situation. Calder is the leader of the team. What does it do to the team when you choose to save Martian Manhunter instead of yourself? And that's what he has to deal with, obviously, in the Fallout episode that covers the ending of this one. This is obviously where I want to come in and talk about his actions as leader. Calder's not a natural leader. He never wanted the position of being a leader. It's not what he wanted, it's not something he usually does, but it's a role that he has taken upon himself because unfortunately, nobody else on the team he believes can do it. And that's very much shown in the following episode, in which each character is getting therapy for what they just went through.
Artemis is too raw and untrusting. Kid Flash too rash and impulsive. Miss Martian remains too eager to please. Superboy carries too much anger.
Making Robin the logical choice.
But he is so young.
Calder, you're all young.
I cannot shift this burden to him. Not yet.
Calder had always seen himself as a soldier and not a general. Somebody who would make the sacrifice for the betterment of those around him because that was the right thing to do, even if it is to the detriment of himself. But when you're a leader, you have to think about what self-sacrificing does to the rest of the people around you, to the group that is around you, who is supposed to be picking up the pieces when you're not there. And he realizes that he was unfairly shifting that burden to Robin, who was far too young and not ready to take on said burden, unfortunately. He is the only option right now. Honestly, I think Calder is the best option. He doesn't want to be a leader. He wants to take care of the people around him, and I think that makes for good qualities of a leader. He's not there for the power, for the status, or anything else. He's there because he believes that this is the only way forward, unfortunately, for him, since he doesn't want to do this. But I also don't think he's the perfect leader. He's never going to stop sacrificing himself in the way that he just did, because that's just who he is as a person. But unfortunately, if you're gonna be the leader of the team, you need to be around. You need to actually be permeable. And so while it is admirable that he would rather stick himself in the line of fire than one of his subordinates, unfortunately, if you throw yourself in that fire enough, you're going to get burned. And that's the reason that he's not perfect for the job, but it's also the reason I think he is the best option, and he is as close to perfect as the team will probably get for that job. And for the rest of the season, we kind of just get the fallout of Calder having to deal with the burden of being the leader of the team, which honestly isn't a lot. That after that episode, they kind of just didn't give Calder a whole lot to do. And again, it's because the production of the show was kind of weird, at least in the way in which they aired, because after this episode 19 that you're probably seeing on screen, Misplaced, they took prior to this episode 19, Misplaced, they took like another couple months break. Like episode 18 of the show airs in November 18th, and then Misplaced doesn't air again until March of 2012. I don't know what the production of this show was looking like, but it was definitely like abnormal. But Calder is basically not given almost anything to do. The last thing I have of reasonable note is the idea of using Dr. Fate's helmet once again in the episode Misplaced, in which the Justice League and Young Justice Squad are separated into two Earths with kids and adults. But unfortunately for Calder, they end up not using it. Well, at least those two don't. He values being there for his team more than anything else. And after that, he goes missing for a string of episodes just in a row, where he's nowhere to be found because they're focusing on other characters. Calder pretty much gets pushed to the sideline for the rest of the show, although he does have a few absolutely wonderful moments that I find to be great. Like, for example, when the team is revealing their secrets to each other, the three proposed moles are being shown that they weren't really moles, even though they were being blackmailed by the villains. Calder's the only one on the team who doesn't react horribly when M'gann transforms into her true white Martian form. He is the first to accept her next to Superboy.
M'gann, did we truly seem so shallow?
I couldn't take the chance.
And as far as the season finale goes, he doesn't really do a whole lot. He's there for Red Arrow when Red Arrow needs somebody, because Red Arrow low-key got revealed to be the traitor, and the Justice League are hunting him down because they're all under the control of Vandal Savage. And while that's all well and cool and good, the rest of the show, he basically either is absent or is just doing more of the same. His character development kind of ends after that episode, which is kind of sad to see, but it only ends for this season. They end up doing a lot more with his character throughout season 2, thankfully, but ultimately, my boy is kind of just left hung out to dry, which is okay. This show was juggling a lot of characters by the end of the season, each having great arcs, in my opinion, especially when looking at characters like M'gann and Connor, who are far more M'gann's more back heavy to the end of the show when it comes to her arc, whereas Connor's more evenly spread throughout, and I think Calder was just simply front loaded. They had a lot of his specific episodes in the front of the season, and by the end of the season, they were done trying to grow his character any further from where it was, which is perfectly fine. Ultimately, what I think we got in terms of getting an Aqualad adaptation was really fun, and it was novel, it was different. And it also spoke to me as a young black kid watching this show. But no wonder I couldn't keep up with this show. Like the airing and production, like the production order seems fine, but the air dates of this show, no wonder I couldn't keep up with it growing up. Like they would just take these huge hiatuses for absolutely no reason that we can figure out, and then they would just come back like nothing else is going on. All of that aside to say, I really enjoyed this interpretation of the character, and I thought for a first season they gave us a wonderful character, even though he has a Michael Schofield-ass hairline. I am very happy with what we got. I enjoyed Calder throughout this season. I enjoyed what he stood for and represented, and I'm excited to talk about him when we get around to season 2, because I've got a lot to say. So thank you all so much for watching, especially if you stuck around to the end, like especially on these longer videos, which this video took me like, dude, college has been kicking my ass. This took me like almost 3 weeks to make, because dude, I don't even know. College has been kicking my ass. So thank you all for being patient and waiting. To those of you on YouTube seeing this video, I just want to once again thank you all so much for watching. You all are amazing. If you want to support the channel, leaving a like helps out a lot. If you want to leave a dislike, please leave a comment down below telling me why, as constructive criticism helps me to be a better creator for all of you guys going forward. You know, if you want to sub, it's free. You could always unsubscribe later. I do run a Patreon in which you can find each and every one of these videos not only early, but completely unedited, so no freeze frames, filters, or whatever else I have to do so that I can be in compliance with YouTube to post this video. And as well, you'll gain access to the Discord where you can chat with me and a bunch of the other people who enjoy watching this show. And finally, if you're in the $5 above tier, I shout you out at the end of each and every one of these videos. So without further ado, shout out Oscar, shout out Megan, shout out Mark Frosty 13, shout out Gabriel Lafonte, Transgers1, Video Gamer 75, shout out Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. You all are amazing. Hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.